now, my impersonation of an intellectual atheist. Well, you see, despite the fact that I'm wearing black socks with brown shoes and a blue suit, the New Testament, you simply cannot rely on it. You see, it was cobbled together by some men who were trying to suppress people with their religious beliefs. Besides, the manuscripts and the books were put together centuries after the time that Jesus lived. Our response? A video from the folks who are responding to a Bart Ehrman who makes the very same accusations.
Ehrman often claims in regards to the New Testament canon that early Christians had a variety of New Testament canons at their disposal. He often talks about what he calls wild diversity within early Christianity, that in the early centuries of the church, people were reading all sorts of books. There was all sorts of different types of versions of Christianity with their own gospels and their own documents, and so it gives this impression that we have this sort of competing set of books where the New Testament canon was in some sense a literary free-for-all, where no one knew which were the right books and no one knew which were the wrong books, and everyone was kind of doing their own thing. Now, that type of presentation certainly has a lot of rhetorical advantages and can certainly sound overwhelming to any student that's not aware of the issues in early Christianity. The problem is that it's entirely misleading in the way it describes the way the canon developed. If one wants to portray the New Testament canon as developing in a way that was entirely haphazard and open-ended until the 4th century, that's simply not the case. When we look into the early centuries of the church, particularly the 2nd century, we realize that the core of the New Testament canon was in place almost from the very beginning. What do we mean by core? What we mean is the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and at least 10, if not 13 epistles of Paul. For example, one of our earliest canonical lists, the Muratorian Fragment, dates from the late 2nd century, probably around 170 or 180 AD. In that particular document, it is clear that there's only 4 Gospels that are received, and it lists all of 13 of Paul's epistles. Now that's in the middle of the 2nd century. Now what that tells you then is that the Muratorian Fragment, that canonical list, didn't make up those things. It's obviously picking up earlier tradition. What we see then is that there's a core of New Testament books that were never really in dispute at all. There was never really a dispute about the Gospels in any fundamental way. It was these 4 from the very start. When it came to Paul's epistles, the core were in place from the very beginning. When we talk about any disputes at all, if we can even use that term, it really has to do with just a handful of books. Some of the peripheral books, 2nd and 3rd John, Jude, and 2nd Peter are the primary books that discussions center upon. But to portray the New Testament canon as entirely open-ended is entirely misleading because the core was there from the start. And if the core was there from the start, then decisions were already made about the divinity of Jesus. Decisions were already made about who he was and what he came to do. Decisions were already made about the nature of the gospel message. So irregardless of what was decided about 2 Peter or Jude, the trajectory of Christianity was already determined from a very early time.